But for now, let's move on to some simple vowel sounds. A is really simple in French because 9 times out of 10 it makes a simple A sound, like in chat. You might also see it though with a grave accent over the top of it. Now this has no phonetic function whatsoever. All the accent is doing here is helping us to differentiate between A with an accent, which means to, and A without an accent, which is the third person singular form of the verb avoir. Either way, it's pronounced A. And the same goes for the circumflex accent. Okay, all this is telling us is that in Old French, the A was followed by an S. So the Old French word for castle is something like chasteau, but the modern word is simply chateau. E really does love its accents in French. On its own, it makes an E sound like in reposer. With an acute accent, it makes an A sound like in énervé. Grave accents change the E to an E sound like in élève. Again, the circumflex accent technically doesn't have a phonetic function, although usually with a circumflex, an E will be pronounced E, like in être. And the umlaut, although fairly rare, does exist, and tells us that we need to pronounce the E separately from the vowel before it, rather than as a single phoneme, like in the word canoë. E. I is pronounced E, like in the word si, with or without an accent. For example, we could have a circumflex again, it's just telling us there used to be an S there, but there no longer is, like in the word il. And the umlaut does the same as it does on the E, tells us pronounce this letter separately from the vowel before it, like in Thaïlande. O. Most of the time, O's make a simple O sound, like in mode, but sometimes do make an O sound, like in hotel. Now again, it's not really the circumflex that's doing this, it's just the word that you kind of have to learn, but you can see the IPA does say that these two are different, but the difference is subtle. We have mode, hotel. Finally, for the vowels we have U, which as the name suggests is pronounced U, like in utiliser or bûche. We move on to consonants. C is usually hard, like in the word cool, but when followed by an E or an I has a soft S sound, like in enceinte. But then some words have C's in them that aren't followed by E's or I's, but are still pronounced S, like in français, and that's because they have the cedilla or cedi on the C to tell us this is a soft S sound. G, don't mix this up with J, which is J, usually makes a hard G sound, like in grand. But like the C, if it's followed by an E or an I, makes a zh sound, like in manger. H is always silent in French. It does exist as a letter, like in the word hôpital, but it's always silent. Now, my IPA isn't perfect, and I'm not sure if there is a way of notating silent letters, but I just put a dash. So I'm sorry to anyone that is like expert in the phonetic alphabet, but yeah. G, remember it's different from J. It's pronounced j, like in je. Although it is always followed by a U, like in English, it only ever makes a k sound, like in musique and qui. If you walk around saying qui, you're speaking Italian. R, this is the infamous French R, which is pronounced r, like in rendre, not r. S usually makes a soft s sound, like it does in English, but can also make a z sound, like in raison. W, which literally means double V, is a rare French letter, and in fact, as far as I'm aware, no truly French word has a W in it, and only words that come from different languages do. For example, we have the word web, which is web as in World Wide Web, not a spider's web. And because we pronounce it w in English, the W is w in French. But the word wagon comes from German, and so it's pronounced with a v sound. There are so few words that actually begin or even have a W in them that you can learn these fairly easily. X, as in English, is usually a x sound, like in extérieur, but at the start of the word it makes a gz sound, like in xylophone. Now this isn't the same as the English xylophone. Okay, you can see the IPA tells us that we need a gz sound, like in xylophone. Y, which literally means Greek I, usually makes a y sound like in English, or in the word voyou, but it can also act as a vowel like it does in the word I. Move on to diphthongs, which are combinations of letters that come together to make a single sound. For example, we have CH, which in French makes a sh sound like in chocolat. I makes a wa sound like in oiseau. EU makes an sound like in feu. OU makes an oo sound like in oo and oo. Again, notice how the grave accent is simply there to differentiate between the two. Without the accent, oo means or, with it, it means where. The AU makes an O sound like in the word eau, which means water. GN in French is similar to the Spanish N with the tilde. It makes a ny sound. Okay, we don't pronounce the G and the N separately. It's a ny, as in gagner. Words that end in ER or ET are pronounced A, like in jouer or ballet. Now, if you look at the IPA, the sounds technically are different. What we should have is jouer and ballet, but the difference is so subtle that even French people don't make the difference between the two. Next we have vowels followed by N's. Usually a vowel sound is changed by an N. For example, in the word internet, although we have an IN, we're not saying internet. It's internet with a very nasal N. AN makes an ON sound like in gant, again very nasal. EN also makes an ON sound like in Jean. And ON becomes ON like in monde. As you can see, those final three have a similar sound. And that's it. I'm sure there are many, many more sounds that we could go over, but A, it would take too much time, and B, you learn how to pronounce things as you learn the language. Obviously, it always helps to have someone to talk to, so if you do have any questions, please do send me a message or an email or however. But until next time,